The wind howled through the canyon like a grieving spirit, carrying with it the scent of iron and smoke. The battle had been swift, brutal, a clash of cultures painted in crimson across the sun-baked earth. Bodies lay strewn where they had fallen, settlers and warriors alike, their stories silenced beneath the indifferent Arizona sky. Among them, a lone figure stirred. Quanah, war leader of the Apache, dragged himself onto his elbows, his breath ragged. An arrow had pierced his side, and his leg bore the deep gash of a settler's knife. Blood seeped through his fingers as he pressed a hand to his ribs, his vision swimming. He should have died. By all rights, he should have died. But death had spared him, and so had her. His dark eyes lifted, scanning the wreckage until they settled on the woman. She was young, too young to be caught in this war, kneeling beside the body of a man, her sun-bleached dress stained with dirt and blood. Her hands trembled as she closed the dead man's eyes, whispering words Quanah did not understand. A prayer, perhaps, or a farewell. He had seen her before the fighting began. She had been at the edge of the settlers' camp, her face pale with fear, clutching a water bucket like a shield. When the first war cry shattered the dawn, she had frozen, not fleeing, not screaming, just staring at the chaos, as if she already knew how this would end. And then, in the thick of battle, their eyes had met. Quanah had raised his knife. She had not flinched. Something in her gaze, not defiance, not even courage, but a quiet, exhausted acceptance, had stayed his hand. He had turned away, leaving her unharmed, a mercy he had not shown the others. Now, as the last echoes of war faded, she stood. Her skirts whispered against the dust as she turned, her gaze locking onto his. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then, hesitantly, she stepped toward him. Quanah tensed. Was this a trick? A final act of vengeance? But when she knelt beside him, her hands were empty. "You're alive," she murmured, her voice rough from disuse, or from crying. Her fingers hovered over his wounds, unsure. I can help." He did not understand her words, but he understood the offering. The same instinct that had spared her now compelled him to nod. She exhaled, as if she had expected him to refuse. Then, with trembling hands, she tore a strip from her already ruined dress and pressed it to his side. The pain was sharp, but Quanah did not react. He only watched her, this woman who should have been his enemy, this stranger who had no reason to show him kindness. "Why?" he asked in Apache, knowing she would not understand. She paused, meeting his gaze. Then, softly, she touched her own chest. "Lena." A name. Quanah studied her, the way the sunlight caught in her tangled hair, the shadows beneath her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the quiet strength in her hands as she worked. She was not a warrior, not a settler's wife, just a woman who had somehow survived. Like him, he inclined his head, pressing a fist to his chest in return. "Quanah." A truce, spoken in the language of the wounded. Above them, the vultures circled. The cave was shallow, little more than a crack in the earth, but it was shelter. Lena dragged Quanah inside, her arms trembling under his weight. He was lean but solid, his muscles taut even in unconsciousness. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage she had tied around his ribs, staining her hands as she lowered him onto the packed dirt. Outside, the wind moaned through the canyon, carrying the distant cries of coyotes. The settlers' camp, what remained of it, lay far behind them now, a graveyard of smoldering wagons and broken dreams. She should have felt something. Fear, grief, anger, but there was only numbness. Quanah stirred, his breath ragged. His dark lashes fluttered, then opened, fixing on her with startling clarity. Lena froze. For a heartbeat, she expected violence, a warrior's instinct to strike out at an unfamiliar face. But his gaze was calm, assessing. He studied her, the dirt streaking her cheeks, the torn hem of her dress, the way her fingers still hovered near his wounds, unsure. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough with pain. She didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. "Why are you still here?" Lena swallowed. "I couldn't leave you." He exhaled sharply, as if her answer frustrated him. With effort, He pushed himself upright, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. His hand went to the knife at his belt, a reflexive gesture, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he nodded toward the cave's entrance. "Go." Lena didn't move. A flicker of something like surprise crossed his face, then resignation. He leaned back against the stone wall, his breath evening out. If she wouldn't leave, he wouldn't waste strength arguing. Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. The first night, darkness fell quickly in the canyon, swallowing the last traces of sunlight. Lena huddled near the cave's mouth, her arms wrapped around her knees. Every rustle of brush, every distant animal cry made her tense. She had spent her life fearing the wilderness, fearing men like him, and now here she was, willingly sharing a hideout with an Apache warrior. Madness. And yet, when she glanced back at Koana, she felt no fear, only a strange, quiet understanding. He was watching her, his eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. She should say something, explain herself. But what words could bridge the chasm between them? She was a settler's daughter. He was a man who had fought against her people. There was no common language, no shared history, only this fragile truce forged in blood. Instead, she reached for the canteen she had scavenged and held it out. Koana hesitated, then took it. Their fingers brushed, just for a second, but it was enough to send a jolt through her. His skin was warm, rough with calluses. A warrior's hands. He drank deeply, then handed it back. "Thank you," she whispered. He said nothing, but his gaze lingered on her face, as if memorizing her features. The bargain. By morning, Kohana's fever had worsened. Lena woke to the sound of his labored breathing. She scrambled to his side, pressing a hand to his forehead. Burning. The arrow wound in his side was inflamed, the skin around it an angry red. Panic clawed at her throat. If infection set in, he would die. She had to find help. But where? The nearest town was miles away. And even if she reached it, no one would aid an Apache warrior. They'd sooner put a bullet in him than offer medicine. Her only choice was to treat him herself. Lena took a steadying breath. Then she touched his shoulder. "I need to clean your wounds." He frowned, uncomprehending. Gently, she mimed pouring water over his injuries, then pointed to the cave's entrance. "I'll be back." Understanding dawned in his eyes, and with it, resistance. His hand closed around her wrist, tight but not painful. A warning. Don't go. Not for his sake, she realized. For hers. Out there, she was vulnerable. Raiders, soldiers, wild animals. Any of them could kill her before she took 10 steps. But if she stayed, he would die. Lena met his gaze and slowly pulled her wrist free. "I'll be careful." For a long moment, he studied her. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. The return. The canyon was merciless in daylight. Lena moved quickly, her senses sharpened by fear. Every shadow seemed to twist into a threat. Every sound set her heart racing. But she forced herself forward, scanning the ground for anything useful. Medicinal herbs, a lost satchel, even a scrap of cloth. She found yarrow growing near a dry creek, its white flowers a stroke of luck. Her mother had taught her it could fight infection. She gathered as much as she could carry, then turned back toward the cave. Koana was where she had left him, but his eyes snapped open the moment she stepped inside. Relief flickered across his face before he could mask it. Lena knelt beside him, crushing the yarrow leaves between her fingers. The sharp, earthy scent filled the air as she pressed the poultice to his wound. He tensed, his breath hissing through his teeth, but he didn't pull away. "This will help," she murmured, though she knew he couldn't understand. His hand found hers again, not to stop her this time, but to steady himself. His grip was strong, grounding, and for the first time since the massacre, Lena didn't feel alone. The fever broke on the third night. Lena woke to stillness. No labored breathing, no restless shifting, just the quiet crackle of the dying fire and the soft sound of Kohana's steady breaths. Moonlight spilled through the cave's entrance, painting silver streaks across his bare torso, where the bandages clung to his healing wounds. She should have been relieved. Instead, a new tension coiled in her stomach. What happened now? He was strong enough to leave. strong enough to vanish into the wilderness and never look back. The thought sent an unexpected pang through her chest. Foolish. He owed her nothing. She had helped him for the same reason he had spared her, because it was the only choice either of them could live with. A rustle of movement. Koana was awake, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Lena held her breath. Slowly, he sat up, testing his strength. His jaw tightened as the wounds pulled, but he didn't falter. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse. Pinda. She didn't know the word, but the way he said it, soft, almost questioning, made her think it wasn't an insult. Lena, she corrected gently, touching her chest. A pause. Then, with deliberate care, he repeated it. Lena. Her name in his mouth sounded foreign, yet familiar, like a song she'd forgotten she knew. The gift. By morning, Koana was gone. Lena told herself it was for the best. She had known this moment would come. Still, the cave felt emptier without him, the silence heavier. She busied herself gathering the last of the yarrow, tying it into bundles for the journey she'd been avoiding. Back to what? The settlement was ashes. Her family, what was left of them, would assume her dead. Maybe it was better that way. A shadow fell across the cave's entrance. Lena spun, her pulse leaping, but it was only Koana. He stood framed in sunlight, his hair loose over his shoulders, a rabbit dangling from one hand. Her breath caught. He hadn't left. Without a word, he knelt by the fire pit, skinning the animal with quick, efficient strokes. Lena watched, transfixed. There was something mesmerizing in his movements, something that spoke of a lifetime lived by blade and instinct. When he finished, he offered her the first cut of meat, a peace offering, a thank you. Lena took it, their fingers brushing. This time, neither of them pulled away. The storm. The rain came at dusk. It began as a whisper, a faint patter against the canyon walls, then swelled into a torrent. Water sluiced through the cave's entrance, forcing them deeper into the shadows. Lena shivered, her damp dress clinging to her skin. Koana frowned, then shrugged off his hide vest and held it out. She hesitated. Take it, his eyes seemed to say. The leather was warm from his body, smelling of smoke and sage. Lena wrapped it around her shoulders, trying not to notice how his gaze lingered on her. Thunder cracked, shaking the earth. Lena flinched, and Koana moved without thinking. One moment they were apart. The next, his arm was around her, pulling her against his side as the cave trembled around them. Heat flooded her cheeks. She should pull away, but his body was solid, steady. His heart beat a slow drum beneath her ear. The storm raged on. Neither of them moved. The warning. The riders appeared at dawn. Lena was fetching water when she saw them. 3 men on horseback, their hats pulled low against the morning sun. Settlers. Her stomach dropped. They hadn't spotted her yet. If she stayed quiet, stayed hidden, they might pass by. But then she heard it. A child's voice. High and clear. Pollock. Apache tracks. No. Lena turned, her heart hammering. Kohana's footprints led straight to the cave. The men dismounted, rifles in hand. She had seconds to decide. Betray the man who had spared her life, or stand with him against her own kind. The choice was no choice at all. Lena ran. Lena reached the cave just as the first gunshot rang out. Dirt exploded near the entrance, kicked up by the bullet's impact. Koana was already on his feet, knife in hand, his body coiled like a wolf ready to lunge. His eyes locked onto hers, not with fear, not with anger, but with something far worse. Resignation. He thought she'd led them here. No. Lena flung herself forward, arms outstretched, placing herself squarely between him and the approaching men. Behind her, Koana went rigid. Stay back, she screamed at the settlers. The lead man, a grizzled farmer with a shotgun, froze mid-step, his brow furrowing. Girl, that you, Jeremiah's girl. His gaze darted past her to Koana, then back. Lord alive, we thought you was dead. The second man spat tobacco onto the ground. Move aside, missy. That savage ain't worth. He saved my life. The lie tore from her throat, desperate and raw. When they... She let her voice break, knowing these men would fill in the gaps with the story they wanted to hear. He protected me. A beat of silence. The farmer's grip on his gun wavered. Kohana's breath was hot against her neck. She could feel his confusion, his suspicion, but he stayed still. The youngest settler, a boy no older than 16, frowned. "Pa, maybe we should." "Shut it, Eli." The farmer's eyes narrowed. "Girl, step away nice and slow. We'll deal with this proper." Lena didn't move. The shotgun cocked. The bluff. Kohana's hand closed around her wrist. She expected him to shove her aside. Instead, his thumb brushed her pulse point. Once, twice, a silent question. "Trust me." Before she could react, he stepped forward, pressing his blade against her throat. The settlers recoiled. "Easy now." The farmer raised his free hand. "Nobody needs to get hurt." Lena went perfectly still. The knife's edge rested against her skin, cold as winter, but there was no pressure behind it. A performance. Kohana's voice cut through the tension, sharp with warning. Though she didn't understand the words, their meaning was clear. Back away, or she dies. The boy paled. "Pa, we can't just." "We're leaving." The farmer grabbed his son's arm, backing toward the horses. "But this ain't over, girl. You remember that." As their footsteps faded, Kohana dropped the knife. Lena whirled to face him. "You could have been killed." He studied her for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, he touched 2 fingers to his lips, then to her forehead, an Apache gesture she didn't understand, but whose tenderness left her breathless. The crossing. They left the canyon that night. Kohana led her through moonlit arroyos, his movements silent as shadow. Lena followed, her borrowed boots crunching too loud on the gravel. Every rustle of brush made her flinch. At dawn, they reached the river. Kohana paused at the water's edge, his profile etched in gold by the rising sun. Beyond lay his people's lands. Forbidden territory for a white woman. Lena's stomach nodded. "I can't go with you, can I?" He didn't answer, just extended his hand. The current was stronger than it looked. Midway across, her foot slipped on a mossy stone. Kohana caught her waist, hauling her against his chest. The water roared around them, but all she could hear was the hammer of his heart. When they reached the far bank, he didn't let go. The fire. The Apache camp was smaller than she'd imagined, just a cluster of wickiups nestled in a cottonwood grove. Women paused in their chores, eyes widening as they took in the bedraggled white girl clinging to their war leader's side. An elderly man stepped forward, his beaded vest gleaming in the firelight. Kohana spoke low and fast, gesturing to Lena, then to his own healing wounds. The old man's gaze sharpened. "She tended you." Lena started. He'd spoken in English. Kohana nodded. For a terrible moment, silence hung thick as smoke. Then the elder smiled. "Then she is welcome." That night, by the communal fire, woman pressed a cup of bitter tea into Lena's hands. A child giggled when she fumbled with the unfamiliar syllables of their greeting. Kohana sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed whenever he leaned forward to translate. No one mentioned the scars on her wrists. No one asked why a settler's eyes held so much sorrow. The stars overhead were the same ones she'd known her whole life. Yet somehow, they shone brighter here. The first snow came early that year. Lena woke to the soft hush of white flakes drifting through the smoke hole of the wickiup Kohana had built for her. Outside, the village stirred, children's laughter ringing sharp in the crisp air, women shaking frost from the hide stretched between lodge poles. She should have felt like an outsider here, a trespasser in a world not meant for her. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to belonging. Pulling on the doeskin dress Kohana's sister had given her, Lena stepped into the morning light. The camp was alive with activity. Old men mending fishing nets, girls grinding corn, boys practicing with tiny bows. No one stared at her anymore. No one whispered. A shadow fell across the snow. "You're learning to move quietly." Kohana stood behind her, his breath fogging in the air. The scar on his ribs, her scar, the one she'd stitched closed with shaking hands, peeked above the neckline of his winter tunic. "Soon you'll walk like one of us." Lena's cheeks warmed. 3 months ago, she'd stumbled through the forest like a wounded deer. Now she could track rabbits, weave baskets, even speak halting bits of his language. "Maybe I am one of you," she teased. His smile faded. A horn sounded in the distance, low, urgent. Every head in camp turned. The strangers. They came on horseback, blue coats stark against the snow. U.S. cavalry. Lena's stomach dropped. Behind her, women began bundling children toward the trees. Warriors melted into the brush, arrows knocked. Only Koana stood his ground, hand resting lightly on his knife as the officer dismounted. We're not here for trouble. The lieutenant's gaze skipped past him, landing on Lena. We're retrieving lost settlers. A murmur rippled through the village. The officer removed his hat. Ma'am, if you've been held against your will. I wasn't. Lena's voice cut through the cold like a blade. The lieutenant blinked. Behind him, a private shifted uneasily. You understand we have to verify that, the officer said slowly. There's a wagon train heading east next week. Safety. Your own people. Your own people. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Koana hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked, but Lena saw the tension in his jaw. This was her choice. The test. They gave her until sunset to decide. Lena sat by the frozen creek, watching the water swirl beneath the ice. The army had set up camp half a mile away, the fire smoke staining the twilight sky. Koana found her there. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, you should go. Her head snapped up. He knelt beside her, his fingers brushing the snow between them. Your world has medicine, ours doesn't. Books. Laws. A muscle jumped in his throat. A future. Lena stared at him. This wasn't the fierce warrior who defied death, nor the patient teacher who'd shown her how to read animal tracks. This was someone new, someone vulnerable. Look at me, she whispered. When he did, she took his face in her hands. His skin was warm despite the cold, his breath uneven. My world, she said slowly, had a father who sold me to pay debts, a husband who marked me like livestock. She pressed his palm to the scars on her wrist. This is my future. Something fierce flashed in his eyes. The horn sounded again, final warning. Koana stood, pulling her up with him. Then we fight. The claim. The lieutenant looked up from his maps as they entered the army camp. Made your decision, ma'am? Lena stepped forward. Around them, soldiers paused in their chores, eyes curious. I have. She reached back, twining her fingers through Kohana's. Tell your commanders this land is protected. Tell them the Apache have an ally now, one who speaks their language. The lieutenant's mouth fell open. Kohana's grip tightened around hers. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent camp. And tell them Lena of the Chehen sends her regards. The war came with the spring rains. Lena stood at the edge of the bluffs, watching the dust cloud on the horizon churn like a storm. Cavalry. 3 companies at least. Behind her, the village moved with quiet urgency. Children herded into hidden canyons, elders bundling sacred medicine bundles, warriors painting their faces with ash. A hand touched the small of her back. Koana. His battle paint made him a stranger, black streaks beneath his eyes, red clay tracing the scars she knew by heart. But when he spoke, his voice was the same one that had whispered to her under winter blankets. You should have gone. Lena turned, pressing the medicine pouch she'd made into his hands. Sage from the canyon, a lock of her hair, the silver button from her dead mother's dress, the last remnant of her old life. And miss all the fun. His laugh was brief, bitter. The wind caught her braid, whipping it like a banner. She'd stopped bleaching it months ago. Now the chestnut strands matched the earth tones of the women who'd become her sisters. A shout echoed from the scouts. The soldiers were crossing the river. Koana cupped her face. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, memorizing. Stay alive, he ordered. Then he was gone, melting into the junipers like shadow. The battle. Gunfire shattered the afternoon. Lena crouched in the healer's tent, grinding yarrow into paste with shaking hands. Outside, the world had gone mad. Horses screaming, men shouting, the terrible wet thud of bodies hitting dirt. Every explosion made her flinch. Every silence was worse. A warrior stumbled in, clutching a shattered arm. His eyes widened when he saw her. Pinned a woman. Why do you? Shut up and sit down. She yanked him onto a blanket, pouring whiskey over the wound. His howl nearly drowned out the drumming of hoofbeats. Too close. Too many. Then the gunshots stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. Lena ran. The sacrifice. The field was a nightmare. Bodies in blue and bodies in buckskin lay tangled in the grass, their blood turning the spring flower scarlet. Smoke curled from a burning supply wagon. Somewhere a wounded horse sobbed. And there, at the center of it all, Koana on his knees. A colonel stood over him, revolver pressed to his temple. 5 soldiers formed a half-circle behind him, rifles trained on the remaining Apache fighters. Last chance, the colonel barked. Surrender, or watch your war chief die. Lena moved before thought. Wait. Every head turned as she pushed through the crowd. The colonel's eyebrow arched. Well, the famous Lena. His smile showed yellow teeth. Come to thank your rescuers. She ignored him, dropping to her knees beside Koana. His left eye was swollen shut, but the right burned with fury. Don't, he rasped. She kissed him instead. A gasp rippled through both armies. When she pulled back, her lips were smeared with his blood. Then she stood, turning to face the colonel. You want surrender? She spread her arms, showing empty hands. Take me. The colonel blinked. What? Hostage? Prisoner? Whatever you call it. She stepped closer, voice dropping. The army's been humiliated. You need a victory. She jerked her chin at Koana. He dies. You make martyrs. But the white woman who chose savages over her own kind. A cold smile. That's a story that'll make Washington happy. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the colonel laughed. Chain him, he ordered, holstering his gun. We're taking her back in irons. Koana lunged, only to freeze when Lena shook her head. Trust me, her eyes pleaded. As the soldiers dragged her away, she kept her chin high. Let them see. Let them all see. The wind carried his roar long after the valley disappeared from view. The return. They kept her in a Santa Fe jail for 6 weeks. The trial was a farce, a parade of officers testifying about savage influence and female fragility. Lena sat silent through it all, her unbleached hair and sun-browned skin damning enough. The night before her sentencing, the jailer forgot to bolt her window. She hit the ground running. It took 17 days to walk back. She lived on stolen eggs and cactus fruit, slept in coyote dens, followed the stars Koana had taught her to name. When she finally stumbled into the valley, her feet were bloody and her ribs showed through her dress. The village was gone, burned. Lena fell to her knees in the ashes. A twig snapped. She whirled, and there he was. Koana looked like death walking. His left arm hung useless, the shoulder badly set. New scars crisscrossed his chest. But his eyes were sunrise after endless night. They crashed together like drought-parched rivers meeting rain. His hands fisted in her hair. Her nails scored his back. No words. None were needed. When he finally pulled back, his voice was raw. I thought you were. Never. She pressed her forehead to his. I told you. I'm not going anywhere. Somewhere in the ruins, a child laughed. The survivors emerged from hiding, first tens, then dozens. Their people, their family. As the women led her toward the new camp, Lena caught sight of the medicine pouch around Kohana's neck. Her button gleamed in the sunlight. A promise kept. Epilogue, the legend. Years later, travelers would speak of the valley where bluecoats never ventured, of the fierce Apache war chief and his pale-eyed wife who turned settlers away with words instead of arrows. The children called her an Azun, she who returned. Koana called her my heart, and when the first snow fell each year, they would stand together on the bluffs, watching the land they'd saved sleep beneath its blanket of white. This concludes the Apache warrior's mercy, a story of sacrifice, resilience, and love that defied the frontier's cruelest odds. If you'd like an extended epilogue or any refinements to the ending, I'm happy to adjust. Just let me know.